You know that old political adage, Iowa, New Hampshire is essential as Chevy Chase in an SNL 40th anniversary episode? It's a great adage. The Boston Globe has called New Hampshire a must-win for Chris Christie, who was in the Granite State last night, and Town Hall says that Rick Perry must win Iowa. But wait a minute, John, given the jumbled GOP field, are there, in fact, this cycle going to be any must-win states for any Republican candidate?
I am very open to the idea that this cycle could be different in a variety of ways. In this respect, I think this cycle will still be the same for most candidates. You might make a case that Jeb Bush doesn't need to win Iowa or New Hampshire. I can't imagine Rick Perry being the Republican nominee without winning Iowa. I can't imagine Mike Huckabee being it without winning Iowa. And I can't imagine Chris Christie being it without winning New Hampshire.
I think Huckabee and Santorum have to win Iowa to be the nominee. Other than that, I just don't see it. Let's say, for instance, Rick Perry finishes second in Iowa behind Jeb Bush and second in Iowa behind Rand Paul, and then wins South Carolina. Didn't have a must-win there. And take Chris Christie in New Hampshire. Let's say Chris Christie finishes a strong third in Iowa and then second to Rand Paul in New Hampshire. My point is, there's so many candidates, there's so many ways to accumulate delegates. The way the calendar works, I just don't see a lot of must-wins.
But that's always been the case. You could always imagine ways to collect delegates. But again, in a world, yes, if Rick Perry comes in second in Iowa and second in New Hampshire, he's got a path to the nomination. But I don't think there's a world in which Rick Perry finishes second in New Hampshire, and I don't think there's a world in which Chris Christie finishes second in Iowa. So, yes, I can imagine doing the right kind of math and the right kind of algebra. I can imagine a path for those guys. But in the real world that we live in, I think for those guys, given their weaknesses in one or the other of the two states, they got to win one of them, or else the momentum is just not going to be there for them to carry on forward.
People look at the Rudy Giuliani experiment and example and say, he waited till Florida. You can't do nothing in the early states. But if you perform well, even without a win, and you start talking to the media about a delegate accumulation strategy, and you keep up enough momentum by closing strong, I don't think you need to win an early state this time. As long as you're accumulating delegates and raising money and performing well in terms of media, in terms of stump speech, I just don't think you need to win the early states. Helpful, to be sure, but I just don't think wins are going to matter, with the exception, as I said, of Huckabee and Santorum in Iowa.
Yeah, I got to say, I just think, you know how this momentum thing works. And I think, again, I can imagine a scenario where some of those guys could make that delegate accumulation strategy, but some of those people are going to be people who aren't going to be raising very much money. A guy like Mike Huckabee, as you said, he needs to win Iowa so he gets the money. All these factors are not all interchangeable.
Unless you got a super PAC where people are writing you $15 million checks, that is as you might say, a game changer.